He had one rule after he escaped. Never talk about it. Never say the name. Never let anyone know he was there. For 40 years, he kept that rule perfectly. He changed his name. He moved 5 times. He raised children who had no idea their father had walked out of the jungle carrying the weight of 918 bodies on his back. And then, on a Tuesday morning in November 2018, exactly 40 years after the massacre, he picked up the phone and called a journalist. He said 3 words, "I was there." What he said next took 11 hours to tell. And parts of it, even now, have never been made public. Because what really happened in Jonestown, the part they don't put in the documentaries, the part that doesn't fit the simple story of a madman and his followers, is something far more terrifying. Not because of what Jim Jones did, but because of how normal it all felt before he did it. If this kind of story keeps you up at night, the kind where you realize the monster didn't look like a monster, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Because this channel exists for exactly one reason: to show you how ordinary people become part of extraordinary horrors. Every week, a new layer. Every video, a new question you won't be able to stop asking. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Not November 18, 1978. Not Jonestown, Guyana. Go back further. Go back to a small apartment in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the spring of 1971. A 23-year-old man named Carter will use only his first name, as he requested is sitting on a fire escape eating a sandwich alone. He has been in Indianapolis for 4 months. He doesn't know anyone. He lost his job at a printing company the previous week. His mother died 8 months earlier from cancer, and his father, a man he barely knew, didn't come to the funeral. Carter is not depressed in a clinical sense. He is simply empty. He says that word specifically in the recordings. Not sad. Not angry. Just empty. Like someone had scooped the center out of him and he was just the edges of a person, walking around, going through motions, waiting for something he couldn't name. On a Sunday in April, he thinks it was the 3rd week of the month but isn't certain. A neighbor knocks on his door and asks if he wants to come to church. Carter is not religious. He was never religious. But he has nothing else to do, and the neighbor, a woman named Dolores, is kind in a way that makes it hard to say no. So he goes. What he walks into is not what he expected. He expected pews, organ music, boredom. What he finds is a room full of noise and warmth and people of every race sitting together, laughing together, eating together at long folding tables after the service. In Indianapolis in 1971, this alone is remarkable enough to make him stop in the doorway and stare. And at the front of the room, not behind a pulpit, but standing in the middle of the crowd, a hand on someone's shoulder, laughing at something a child just said, is a man in a black suit and dark glasses. Jim Jones. Carter watches him for a long time before Jones sees him. And when Jones finally looks up, when his eyes find Carter's across that crowded room, Carter says he felt something he had no word for at the time. He found the word years later, in a therapist's office, going through the exact sequence of that moment. The word, he says, was seen. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt seen by another human being. That feeling is where it starts. Remember that. Because that feeling is the most important piece of this entire story, and we will come back to it. But first, there is something you need to understand about who Jim Jones was in 1971. Something that gets lost in the decades of retrospect, something that gets buried under Kool-Aid jokes and cult horror stories. In 1971, Jim Jones was genuinely doing something remarkable. People's Temple fed hundreds of poor families every week. They ran a drug rehabilitation program that was getting results. They cared for elderly members who had been abandoned by their families. They were racially integrated at a time when that was still dangerous in many parts of America. Carter knew none of this when he walked in. He found it out slowly, over weeks, as he kept coming back. Not because anyone pressured him. Because he wanted to come back. Because for the first time since his mother died, he felt like he was somewhere that mattered. He starts volunteering. Good with his hands €, printing background, knows equipment €, and within 2 months he's running the church newsletter. He works long hours and doesn't mind. The church has become his family, his purpose. He meets a woman named Ruth, a fellow volunteer, and falls quietly and deeply in love over the course of a year. He says this part carefully in the recordings. I want you to understand that the people were real. The friendships were real. The love was real. That's what I need you to know before I tell you the rest. The rest. There is always a rest. The first sign €, the thing Carter later identified as the first sign, though he did not register it as a sign at the time €, happened in the winter of 1972. A man in the congregation, a quiet older man named Harold, began asking questions during planning meetings. Not hostile questions. Reasonable questions about how donations were being used, whether certain expenditures made sense, whether the congregation shouldn't have more visibility into the finances. Carter remembers thinking Harold raised fair points. He remembers thinking, I'll ask about this myself next week. Harold wasn't there the following week. When Carter asked Dolores €, the woman who had first brought him to the church €, where Harold was, she looked at him with an expression he didn't understand at the time. She said Harold had decided to move on. She said it carefully, in a way that made Carter feel he shouldn't ask anything further. He didn't. He tells the journalist, that was the first door I didn't open. I knew something was on the other side. I chose not to look. And here is what Carter says was the most disturbing realization of his entire 40 years of reflection €, not the massacre itself, not the night of November 18, not the bodies. This, that even as he speaks those words into a recording device in 2018, he still cannot fully explain to himself why he didn't open that door. He was an intelligent man. He was a skeptical man. He did not believe in supernatural healings or prophecy. And yet there was something in the architecture of that community €, something in the warmth and the belonging and the sense of purpose €, that made asking certain questions feel like an act of self-destruction. Like asking the questions would cost him everything he had built, every relationship, every reason he had found to get out of bed in the morning. The community had become the answer to the emptiness, he says. And the questions felt like emptiness asking to come back. Pay attention to that. Because that is not weakness. That is human psychology operating exactly as it was designed to operate. And it was being exploited with a precision that most people, even now, do not fully appreciate. By 1974, Jones has moved the core of People's Temple to San Francisco. Carter goes. Ruth goes. Most of their friends go. The church has grown significantly €, thousands of members, political connections, newspaper coverage. Carter is now a senior volunteer, deeply embedded in operations. He sees Jones regularly. And it is during this period, in San Francisco, that he begins to see something he cannot explain away. It starts with the night meetings. Jones begins holding late assemblies €, sometimes beginning after midnight, lasting until 3 or 4 in the morning €, where members are expected to attend. At these meetings, Jones conducts what he calls catharsis sessions. Members are called to the front and required to confess failings in front of the group. Infidelities. Doubts. Moments of selfishness. The confessions are recorded. Carter does not know this at first. He later discovers that the recordings are kept as what Jones privately calls insurance. The confessions were not spiritual exercises. They were leverage. But Carter doesn't know this in 1974, and even if he had known, he would have had to weigh that knowledge against everything else. Against Ruth. Against his friends. Against the food programs and the elderly members and the work that was genuinely helping people. That is the trap that Carter spends 11 hours trying to describe. It wasn't one thing. It was never just one thing. There was always enough good to make the bad seem like an exception. Always enough warmth to make the cold seem like a misunderstanding. Always enough reason to stay. In 1976, Carter witnesses something that changes the temperature of everything. He is in a back room of the church's San Francisco headquarters when he hears raised voices through a wall. He recognizes Jones's voice, and a voice he doesn't recognize. The conversation lasts perhaps 8 minutes. Carter cannot hear every word. But he hears enough. He hears Jones say, in a tone he has never heard before, stripped of warmth and charisma he hears Jones say, "No one leaves. You understand what I'm saying to you? No one." Carter stands very still with copies in his hands. He hears a door close. He waits for 3 full minutes before he moves. When he finally leaves the room, the hallway is empty. He never finds out who Jones was speaking to. He tells the journalist, "That was the second door. The one I should have run through." He didn't. Because Ruth was 3 months pregnant with their first child. This is the thing the history books miss. Not that people were stupid or blindly fanatical, but that they were tangled. By love, by parenthood, by debt, by the terrifying cost of starting over with nothing. In 1977, when the first critical news articles begin appearing in San Francisco newspapers, Jones announces a vision. God has revealed to him that the congregation must build a new home, a socialist paradise in the jungle of Guyana, South America. A place free from American racism and capitalism. A place where they will build something the world has never seen. Carter does not want to go. Ruth does not want to go. Their son, born in February of that year, is 7 months old. But most of their friends are going. And Jones makes it very clear, in quiet ways and not so quiet ways, that those who stay behind will not be welcomed back. Carter and Ruth discuss it for 2 weeks. In the end, they pack everything they own into 4 suitcases and board a plane to Guyana. What they find in the jungle is not paradise. From the first week, Carter knows something is deeply wrong. The agricultural settlement is behind schedule. Food is rationed. Work hours are brutal €12, 14 hours a day under a sun that makes Indianapolis winters seem like memory. Jones, increasingly dependent on drugs, is erratic. Paranoid. The nightly radio broadcasts over camp speakers ranting monologues about enemies and conspiracies sometimes last until 2 in the morning. There is no privacy. There are guards. The passports of all residents have been collected by temple leadership for safekeeping. Carter realizes, in the 3rd week, that he cannot leave. He tells the journalist, "It's easy to ask why didn't you just walk into the jungle? It's easy when you're sitting somewhere safe. But I want you to understand I had a wife. I had an infant son. I was in a jungle in a country I'd never been to, surrounded by guards, with no passport, no money, no communication with the outside world. And around me were people I loved, people who still believed, who would have turned me in if I tried to organize anything. Because that's what the system had built. Not guards with guns. Fear between friends. That's the masterpiece of what he built." He begins to plan quietly. Silently. Over months. He watches the guards. He memorizes the patrol schedules. He finds 2 other people he trusts, a man named August and a woman whose name he still won't reveal, to protect her surviving family members. They don't talk openly. They communicate in glances, in small signals, in the way you pass a note in a class when the teacher is watching. In the late summer of 1978, Carter begins stealing food in small quantities, hiding it in a cache in the jungle beyond the compound's cleared perimeter, accessible through a gap in the undergrowth he identified over weeks of careful observation. He does not tell Ruth about the plan at first. He is afraid she won't come. He is more afraid she will tell someone. He does not tell her until 3 weeks before November 18th. When he finally does, she is silent for a long time, looking at him in the darkness of their shared sleeping space with their son between them. Then she says, "When?" Here is where the story becomes something Carter says he can barely speak about even now. On November 14th, 4 days before the massacre, 4 days before Congressman Leo Ryan's delegation is shot at the airstrip, 4 days before the poison is mixed into the vats, 4 days before 918 people die Carter and Ruth and their son in August and the woman whose name he will not give slip through the gap in the undergrowth at 3:45 in the morning and walk into the jungle. They walk for 7 hours. They reach a road. They find a truck driver who speaks enough English to understand the word embassy. They reach Georgetown, the capital, and walk into the American embassy on November 15. Carter tells them that something terrible is about to happen in Jonestown. He tells them about the guards, about the confiscated passports, about what he has seen, about the rehearsals and here, stop, because this matters enormously and is not widely understood the rehearsals. Because Carter tells the journalist that Jonestown had, in the months prior, conducted multiple drills that Jones called White Nights. In these drills, all residents were assembled and told that enemies were coming, that they would all be killed, that the only dignified response was to die together. People drank from cups. Then Jones would tell them the cups contained poison. Then Jones would tell them the cups actually did not contain poison. This time it was a test. This time it was to see who was truly committed. And Carter tells the journalist and this is the part he says he cannot reconcile even now, 40 years later that most people, after these drills, were not more afraid. They were more bonded. They were more committed. Because surviving a near-death experience together, even a manufactured one, even a fake one, does something to human psychology that cannot be easily undone. It creates intimacy. It creates the feeling that you and the people beside you have been through something no one outside could ever understand. Jones understood this. He had been building it for years. The White Nights were not preparation for death. They were preparation for consent. Carter tells the embassy officials everything he knows. He is debriefed for hours. He is told his information has been noted. And then, on November 18, the news comes in over the radio, and Carter sits in a room in the American embassy in Georgetown and listens to the numbers. 100. 300. 600. 918. He sits in that room for 11 hours. He does not cry during those 11 hours. He says he didn't cry for 3 years. Not because he didn't feel it, but because the feeling was so large there was no gesture adequate to it. When he finally cried, he was alone in a car in a parking lot in Seattle in 1981, listening to a radio program about Jonestown. A woman who had lost her entire family spoke about a Sunday afternoon when her son had laughed at something Jones said and looked up at her with a face full of light. Carter pulled over and sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. He cried for Ruth, who had survived. For his son, who would grow up not knowing what his first years of life had been. For August, who had made it out. For Harold, who had asked reasonable questions and was gone the following week. For Dolores, who had knocked on a door in Indianapolis and invited a lonely young man to church because she was kind and couldn't have imagined. For all the ordinary people who had been looking for exactly what Carter had been looking for, community, purpose, the feeling of being seen and had found it, genuinely found it, in the same place that eventually consumed them. Carter spent 11 years in therapy. He built a life under a different name in a city he won't identify. He raised 3 children who knew their father as a quiet, careful man who asked thoughtful questions and listened with a seriousness that sometimes surprised people who didn't know him. He never told them about Jonestown until his eldest was in college, in 2004, and asked directly after reading about it in a history class. Carter told him everything. His son didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Did you know? At any point, did you know what he was?" And Carter gave the journalist the same answer he gave his son. He said, "I knew something was wrong. I could feel the shape of it. But knowing something is wrong and knowing what is wrong, those are different things. And between those two kinds of knowing, there is a gap that men like Jim Jones live in. That is where they operate. That is what makes them possible." He pauses on the recording. You can hear him breathe. Then he says, "The question isn't whether you would have seen it coming. The question is whether you've ever felt empty enough to stop looking." The interview ends there. Not because Carter had nothing more to say. but because after 11 hours, neither man in the room had anything left to ask. Some silences are not endings. They are the space where you realize the question you've been asking how did this happen? How did they not see it? Was never the right question. The right question is quieter. More uncomfortable. It doesn't ask about 918 people in a jungle 40 years ago. It asks about the room you're in right now, and who in it makes you feel seen, and whether you've ever stopped to ask yourself why. There is always a door you chose not to open. The only question worth asking is what's on the other side of yours.